Welcome back to the Pastoral Finance Podcast. I'm Todd Hugel, and this is episode 5. A pastor asked me something recently, and I want to build this episode around that. He said, "We just made our last mortgage payment. Does my housing allowance go away now?" And you could hear it in his voice. He had just done the thing that everybody throws a party for. And instead of celebrating, he was bracing for bad news. I told him no. Then I told him the part nobody had ever explained. We're going to take our time with this one today because the housing allowance is the single most valuable thing in a pastor's financial life, and almost nobody really uses it to its full extent. Not because they're careless, it's because the rules were probably never really explained to them in plain English. Now, in my experience, most pastors don't sit there believing the allowance is a mortgage benefit exactly. It's softer than that. They just quietly assume it stops being worth much. And on the surface, that makes sense. The mortgage was the biggest housing expense they had, and now it's gone. So they figure the allowance shrinks to almost nothing. And that maybe it was just, well, it was nice while it lasted. Then there's a smaller group that goes the other direction. They hang on to a mortgage on purpose to protect the benefit. And I understand the instinct, but there's something real that never shows up on that spreadsheet. You see, there's a way a man sleeps in a house that nobody can take from him. That piece is an actual return. It just doesn't show up on a line item. And here's what both groups are usually missing. The expense side of this doesn't drop nearly as far as they think it does. Not if you know what counts. The housing allowance was never tied to just a mortgage. It's tied to what it actually cost you to provide a home. And that list is wider than most pastors think. It is your mortgage payment for sure. It's principal and interest both, but also property taxes, homeowners insurance, utilities, and that means gas, electric, water, sewer, trash, homeowners association dues, repairs, maintenance, furnishings, and appliances, including repairing them, pest control, snow removal, yard work, the stuff that keeps a house standing and livable. Those costs don't stop when the mortgage does. Now, anybody who has owned a paid-off house for even one winter will know this. Now, there's a ceiling on what you can exclude, of course. It's 3 different things you got to look at. Your exclusion, your home housing allowance exclusion is the lowest of these 3. One, the first thing is what was designated in advance in writing. Secondly, what you actually spent providing the home, your actual expenses. And third, it's the fair rental value of the home. But that's fully furnished plus utilities. Now, it's the smallest of those 3 numbers. That 3-part test, that's the whole game. Almost every mistake I see comes from somebody not knowing which of those 3 numbers is the one holding them back. So here's what really happens the day the mortgage clears. Your actual expenses, they do drop. So your allowance usually drops with them, but it doesn't vanish. Taxes, insurance, utilities, and upkeep are still real money leaving your account every month, and they still count. Pay off the house, then get the allowance redesignated to match what you're actually spending now. That's the whole fix. One detail that matters, a designation only works going forward in advance of the pay it applies to. You can't go back in December and redesignate back to January. That's the single most common way pastors lose money on this. And it is completely unrecoverable once the year is gone. But you don't have to wait for a new year either. Pay the house off in June, ask the board to redesignate in June for the rest of the year. Get it in the minutes. A verbal agreement with a board chair is not a designation. Well, let me draw the other line too, because the people sometimes will get burned here. Food doesn't count. Clothing doesn't count. Cleaning services and domestic help doesn't count. Those are living expenses, not housing expenses, and the distinction matters. And if anybody ever looks at that, it will matter. And the allowance only applies to your principal residence. It doesn't count towards a vacation place, not a second home, not the rental property, and not the farm. One home, the one you live in. Home equity loan payments can count, but only to the extent the money actually went into housing. Borrow against the house to pay for a kid's tuition, and those payments are not housing expenses. Borrow against the house to redo the bathroom, and they are. Now, here's the piece I almost never hear pastors factor in, and it's the reason the allowance stays worth real money after the mortgage is gone. Home improvements count, not just repairs, improvements. For instance, a kitchen remodel, new flooring, a new roof, HVAC system, a deck, landscaping, appliances and furnishings, structural work. Those are real housing expenses and they count in full in the year you pay for them. In other words, it's the year the work is done and you actually have that expense. You don't depreciate them out over time the way you would on a rental property. The year you write the check is the year it counts. Think about what that means for a retired pastor with a paid off house. The year you replace that roof, your actual housing expenses jump. So does the amount you can potentially exclude. So it's not a slow fade to nothing. It's a smaller baseline of taxes, insurance, utilities, and upkeep with bigger years whenever you put real money into the house. And most of us do put real money into a house that we intend to go grow old in. The bathroom, you maybe widen it for accessibility. The step you take out at the front door, the heat pump that finally gives up. Those aren't just retirement expenses, they're housing expenses and they belong on the worksheet. Which brings me to something worth planning around, and this is a place where a little forethought is worth real money. Remember that third number, the fair rental value of your home. That's the rental value furnished plus utilities. Keep in mind that is your ceiling and it resets every single year. Now, picture a pastor with a paid off house. His base line housing costs run, let's say, just for our sake here today, $12,000 a year, $1,000 a month. The fair rental value of his home furnished with utilities is around 24,000. So in a normal year, he can exclude 12. His actual spending is what's limiting him. But then he decides to do a big project, a kitchen and a bath renovation, $30,000 all in one year. His actual expenses that year jump to 42,000, but his ceiling is still 24. So he excludes 24,000 and $18,000 of real legitimate housing spending does absolutely nothing for him. It just evaporates. Now run it the other way. Suppose the work and the payments get split across 2 tax years, 15,000 paid in one and 15,000 the next. Year 1 his expenses are 27,000 and he's capped at 24. Year 2 same thing, 27 capped at 24. 2 years, 48,000 excluded instead of 36. Same project, same money out of his pocket. $12,000 more of it is sheltered purely because of when those checks were written and that work was done. Now that is not a trick and it's not aggressive. It's just knowing that the ceiling is annual and expenses count in the year that they're paid. So if you're retired, you're and your house is paid off and you're looking at a project big enough to blow past your fair rental value, ask the contractor about phasing it. Kitchen this fall, bathrooms in the spring. Deposit in December, balance in January. 3 cautions on that, and I want to be clear about them. The payments have to actually happen in the years you're claiming. So this is about genuine timing, not paperwork games. You still need distributions designated to cover it. So the money has to actually be coming out of the plan. And you should run the specific plan past somebody who knows clergy taxation before you sign anything, because your fair rental value and your numbers are not the ones I just made up. They're your actual numbers. But the principal idea still holds. 2 tax years give you 2 ceilings, 1 tax year gives you 1, all of which depends on a number most pastors have never actually calculated. Ask a pastor what his home would rent for, furnished with utilities included, and you usually get a shrug. They don't know. And that shrug is expensive because that number is the actual ceiling on everything we've been talking about. You don't need an appraisal, But you do need a defensible estimate and something in the file showing how you got there. Look at what comparable homes in your area are actually renting for. Add something reasonable for furnishings, add your utilities, print the listing you use, date them, and do it again every year or two. I mean, if you don't do it every year, do it at least every couple of years because rent prices move. Two things happen when you finally run that number. Some pastors discover their ceiling is a lot higher than they assumed, which means they've been leaving money on the table for years they could have used um, to cover some of those housing expenses. Others discover it's lower than they assumed, which means they've been over excluding and didn't even know it. Either way, you want to know. And notice this, improving a home tends to raise its fair rental value too. So that ceiling isn't frozen in place. The remodel that raises your expenses often raises your cap along with it. Now, here's where this stops being a mortgage story and becomes something much better. The housing allowance doesn't have to end when your paycheck does. If you're retired from ministry and drawing from a qualifying church or denominational plan, a 403b-9, that plan can generally designate your distributions as housing allowance. To the extent you have real housing expenses and inside those same three limits, that money can come to you free of federal income tax. Most people spend 40 years filling a retirement account, knowing every dollar that comes back out is taxable. For a pastor in the right kind of plan, a chunk of it isn't. Year after year, for as long as you've got a home to pay for, that can come out as housing expenses, housing allowance. So let me put some numbers on it. Hypothetically, say you're drawing $36,000 a year from your church plan. Your house is paid off, but taxes, insurance, utilities, upkeep still run you $12,000. If the fair rental value supports it and the plan designates it, the $12,000 can come out free of federal income tax. Only the rest of it is taxed. Now, add a roof that year or the phase renovation we just talked about, suddenly a much larger share of that distribution is sheltered from those federal income taxes. And there's a second piece that almost nobody mentions. For an active minister, the housing allowance still owes SECA. You pay self-employment tax on it, and that catches a lot of young pastors off guard. But housing allowance from your pension income for a genuinely retired minister generally isn't treated as self-employment income at all. And that's a real difference between working and retired. And I've never once heard a generalist advisor bring it up. Now, it reaches your required minimum distributions too. Once you hit RMD age, which is 73 or 75, depending on your year of birth, you have to take money out whether you want to or not. Those distributions can generally be covered by a housing allowance designation as well, if you got the expenses behind it to make it work for you. Check the specifics with your plan and somebody who knows clergy taxes. Plans differ. There are real conditions, and you do have to actually be retired in the way IRS means it, not just slowing down. But the benefit is real and it is large. I want to say something to a specific group here because this episode could land hard on you otherwise. If you spent your ministry in a church-owned parsonage, you've had the housing provided, which is a genuine blessing, but you arrive at retirement with two things working against you. No equity built up, and no mortgage payment to redirect because you never had one. So two things worth knowing. Even in a parsonage, you can generally have an allowance designated for the housing costs the church doesn't cover. Utilities, furnishings, repairs, the things you pay for yourself. A lot of parsonage pastors never ask for that, and it's money left sitting on the table year after year. And in retirement, the same door is open to you as anybody else. Whatever home you end up in, rented or purchased, the cost of providing it can support a housing allowance designation from a qualifying plan. The parsonage years don't disqualify you. They just mean the planning matters more and earlier. Now, here's the hard part. You can lose all of this permanently in one afternoon, and nobody will warn you. Roll your church plan into a traditional IRA, and that housing allowance treatment is gone. An IRA is not a church plan. It cannot designate a housing allowance. Same story with 401k. And you usually can't undo it. Moving the money back later does not reliably bring the benefit back with it. Money transferred in from other accounts generally doesn't qualify for the retired minister designation either. The door closes behind you. Now picture who's in the room when that call gets made. A perfectly decent advisor looking at your church plan sees a short investment menu and suggests consolidating it into an IRA where he can manage it properly for you. He isn't being dishonest. He simply doesn't know he's trading away decades of tax-free income because almost none of his clients are ministers. He's solving for fund options and he has no idea what it costs you. And I'll say the uncomfortable version out loud. If the only thing wrong with your church plan is the investment lineup, that is a smaller problem than losing the ability to pull money out tax-free for the rest of your life. Sometimes a partial rollover makes sense for money you'll never need for housing. Whole account moves are where the damage typically happens. So 5 things. 1, if the mortgage is close to done, finish it. Don't carry debt to protect a benefit that was never attached to the debt. 2, redesignate. Ask the board to update your allowance to match what you're actually spending in advance, in writing, in the minutes. 3, calculate your fair rental value, furnished plus utilities. Write down how you got there. Keep the comparables in a file. 4, keep receipts and keep them by category. Taxes, insurance, utilities, repairs, improvements, furnishings. Your exclusion is capped by what you'd actually spent, and if you can't document it, you can't claim it. 5, this is the big one. Before you move $1 out of a church retirement plan, talk to somebody who understands clergy taxation, not after, before. That single conversation may be worth more than every investment decision you make in retirement. Jesus asked a question once about a man who wanted to build a tower. Which of you, he said, doesn't first sit down and count the cost to see whether he has enough to finish it? He wasn't warning against building. He was warning against building without looking. That's most of what this episode is. Nobody hands a pastor a map on this. You get a calling, and the machinery underneath it stays unexplained. So you make reasonable decisions with half the information, and some of them quietly cost you for 30 years. Counting the cost isn't a lack of faith. It's what a faithful steward does before he starts building. One thing this week, find out exactly what kind of retirement plan you have. Not roughly, exactly. Is it a 403b church plan or is it something else? Most pastors I ask cannot answer that with confidence. And it's the one fact that decides whether everything we just talked about is even available to you. Call your plan provider, ask them straight out, write it down. And if you've got a project coming up on the house, pull the timing questions forward now while you can still decide when the checks get written. I've written more about how the housing allowance work in retirement over at pastoralfinance.com. Free to read, nothing to buy. So back to the pastor with the paid off house. No, you don't lose your housing allowance, it adjusts. Handled well, it can follow you all the way into retirement, and the years you put money into that house are the years it does the most work for you. The mortgage was never the point. The home was. This is one of the few places where the tax code genuinely looks out for ministers. Don't give it away by accident, and don't leave half of it sitting on the table because someone didn't walk you through it. Quick reminder before we go. This show is for education and encouragement, not personalized financial or tax advice. Before you act on anything, talk it through with a qualified professional who knows clergy taxes and your situation. Go find out what plan you have, and thanks for spending this time with me.